Imagine this. You're just minding your own business, walking down the street, when suddenly you're stopped by an officer asking for your ID. But here's the catch. What if you don't have to show it? What if you have the legal right to refuse? Today, we're diving into 3 real-life ID refusals that prove knowing your rights can change everything. In these intense moments, the people involved aren't just fighting for their privacy. They're standing up against authority, making crucial decisions that could change the course of their day. From one person's calm refusal to another's tense standoff, these encounters show just how powerful it is to understand the law. But the question remains, what happens when the situation escalates? Stick around as we uncover the truth behind these unforgettable refusals. And stay tuned to find out what happens when rights clash with authority. In one case, a man named Jake was walking home from the store when an officer flagged him down. The officer, dressed in uniform, demanded Jake's ID, claiming he matched the description of someone involved in a nearby incident. Jake was confused. He hadn't done anything wrong. But before he reached for his wallet, he remembered something crucial. He knew his rights. He had the right to refuse to provide ID unless there was reasonable suspicion of a crime. Calmly, Jake asked, "Am I being detained?" The officer hesitated, clearly thrown off. Tension filled the air as Jake stood his ground, keeping his hands visible. The officer then asked him again, this time with a bit more authority in his voice. But Jake, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the law, simply repeated, "Am I being detained?" What happened next would surprise everyone. But was it enough to avoid a confrontation? The officer's pause was brief, but long enough to shift the atmosphere. Jake's heart beat a little faster, but his voice remained steady. "Am I free to go?" he asked again. The officer's eyes narrowed, sensing that Jake wasn't backing down. Jake's grip on his phone tightened, and he subtly began recording. The last thing he wanted was for this to escalate, but he wasn't going to let his rights be violated. From across the street, a woman named Emily watched the interaction unfold. She was familiar with these encounters. She had seen her own brother detained without cause just weeks earlier. Watching Jake's calm resolve sparked something in her. She pulled out her own phone, recording from a distance, just in case things took a turn. Emily knew the tension was rising, but she wasn't sure if Jake knew how close he was to crossing a line. The officer, visibly frustrated, glanced at his partner, a rookie still unsure of his role. There was an unspoken hesitation. How far would they push it? Jake, aware of the mounting pressure, took a step back. Was this the right time to assert his rights, or was it time to de-escalate before things got worse? The air was thick with the possibility of conflict, and the question on everyone's mind, would this standoff end peacefully, or was it about to take a dangerous turn? The officer's partner took a few tentative steps forward, his eyes darting nervously between Jake and the senior officer. It was clear they were running out of options. The older officer, trying to regain control, leaned in slightly. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he muttered, his voice low, almost threatening. Jake stood firm, his posture unwavering. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he replied, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. He could feel the eyes of both the officer and the growing crowd, their attention shifting from curiosity to something more uneasy. Emily, still recording, could hear the quiet murmurs from nearby pedestrians, sensing that this wasn't just a simple exchange. This was something bigger. A few more moments passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Jake's phone was still recording, but the unease was settling in. He could hear the officer's partner say something under his breath, maybe a warning, maybe an order. Jake didn't flinch. He wasn't going to back down, but he also knew that the line between standing his ground and provoking an unnecessary escalation was razor thin. The crowd started to grow, the once casual onlookers now actively watching, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. Was it about to go too far? The officer's eyes flickered to the phone Jake held, then back to his face, a mix of frustration and something darker in his gaze. Would they try to make this a bigger issue than it needed to be? And just when it seemed like things couldn't get more intense, the rookie officer took a step forward, his voice barely audible, but clear enough to make Jake's heart race. "We're asking for your ID one more time," he said, his tone laced with authority. "If you don't give it, we'll have no choice but tow." The rest of the sentence hung in the air, the implication far worse than the words themselves. Would Jake be forced to comply? Would the crowd turn on him? And what was the rookie officer about to do? Jake's pulse quickened as the rookie's words lingered in the tense silence. The senior officer shot him a sharp look, as if warning him to tread carefully. But before anything else could happen, a voice from the crowd cut through the moment like a crack of thunder. "He doesn't have to show you anything unless you can explain why he's being detained." It was Emily. She stepped forward, her phone still recording, her voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. The officers both turned toward her, their expressions shifting from authority to annoyance. Jake felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly overtaken by worry. Emily's bold move had redirected the tension, but it also raised the stakes. Would her interference escalate things even further? The senior officer straightened up, clearly trying to maintain control of the situation. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you," he said firmly. But Emily wasn't backing down. "It concerns everyone when rights are being pushed aside," she replied, her tone unwavering. The crowd murmured in agreement, a few others stepping closer, their phones also pointed at the scene. The shift in dynamic was palpable. The officers now had more than just Jake to contend with. The senior officer looked visibly frustrated, his authority being tested not just by Jake, but by the growing crowd. Jake exchanged a quick glance with Emily, his heart pounding. Her intervention had bought him a moment of reprieve, but it also introduced a new layer of unpredictability. Then out of nowhere, another man from the crowd stepped forward. "I've been through this too," he said, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "They tried to pull the same thing on me last week. Stand your ground." The crowd seemed to grow more emboldened, the energy around them shifting from uneasy observation to quiet defiance. The officers, now surrounded by watchful eyes and cameras, exchanged a tense look. The pressure was mounting, and it was clear this situation was heading toward a breaking point. But who would make the next move? The senior officer took a deep breath, clearly weighing his options. The crowd was growing louder, and the cameras pointed in his direction seemed to amplify every move he made. Jake held his ground, his phone still recording, while Emily and the others stood ready to step in if needed. Finally, the officer broke the silence. "Fine," he said, his voice sharp and clipped. "You're free to go." For a brief moment, Jake felt a wave of relief, but it didn't last long. As he turned to leave, the rookie officer called out, "Wait." Everyone froze. The rookie looked nervous but determined, his hand hovering near his belt. "I think we should." "Enough," the senior officer interrupted, cutting him off. The rookie hesitated, his expression torn, but eventually backed down. Jake nodded at Emily in silent gratitude and began walking away, the crowd parting to let him through. Just as it seemed the tension had finally broken, Emily noticed something strange. The man who had spoken up earlier, claiming a similar experience, was now quietly slipping out of the crowd. He moved quickly, his head down, avoiding the cameras. Emily's instincts kicked in, and she turned her phone toward him. Something wasn't adding up. Was he just another concerned bystander, or had he been planted there to escalate the situation? As Jake disappeared into the distance, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The officers had backed down this time, but their hesitation, the rookie's lingering tension, and the mysterious man's sudden departure left her wondering. Had Jake truly won? Or had he only delayed something bigger? The truth, it seemed, was still out there, waiting to unfold. As the crowd began to disperse, the tension in the air slowly faded. Jake, now a safe distance away, felt a mix of relief and unease. He had stood his ground and exercised his rights, but the encounter left him questioning how often others might face the same situation without knowing what to do. Emily stopped recording and looked back at the officers, who were quietly talking, their frustrations still evident. The man who had slipped away remained a mystery, a lingering question that no one could answer. Later, as Emily replayed the footage on her phone, she realized the importance of what had just happened. This wasn't just about Jake. It was about showing people that knowledge is power. By understanding their rights, individuals can navigate these tense moments without fear. The experience left everyone, including the audience watching, with a powerful message. Standing up for your rights can make a difference, even in the most challenging situations.